The reading this morning is from John 21, verses 1 to 14. Jesus and the miraculous catch of fish. Afterward, Jesus appeared again and his disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. It happened this way. Simon Peter, Thomas, called Didymus, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples were together. "I'm going out to fish," Simon Peter told them, and they said, "We'll go with you." So they went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Early in the morning Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realise that it was Jesus. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw out the net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. Then the disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, "It is the Lord." As soon as Simon Peter heard him say, "It is the Lord," he wrapped his outer garment around him, for he had taken it off, and jumped into the water. The other disciples followed in the boat, towing the net full of fish, for they were not far from shore, about 100 yards. When they landed, they saw a fire of burning coals, there with fish on it and some bread. Jesus said to them, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter climbed aboard and dragged the net ashore. It was full of large fish, 153. But even with so many, the net was not torn. Jesus said to them, "Come and have breakfast." None of the disciples dared ask him, "Who are you?" They knew it was the Lord. Jesus came, took the bread and gave it to them, and did the same with the fish. This was now the 3rd time Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from the dead. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning. Happy New Year to everyone. Lovely to see you all. Brian said to me before the service started, he said, "I should have brought my fishing gear, shouldn't I?" I thought about it. I was actually talking to David about it, saying he should bring some of his gear. And he said, "I'm going to Millgrove Heights," so he said Millgrove Heights rather than here. Let's go fishing. Let's go fishing. I was courting Brigitte, and she had 2 younger brothers. One was about 14 and the other was about 10, Peter and John. And I don't know how it came about, but we ended up saying, "Let's go fishing." And we were down at Dramana or somewhere like that, and there was a boats you could hire and a fishing tackle we could take out. And so we got together and got one of these boats and hopped in, and had a motor. So you started up the motor and off we went out and into the bay. I don't know why in the world I thought that I could fish or that I could drive a motorboat. But we got out there, we turned the motor off and we started fishing. And I think we had very similar experience to the disciples. No fish, no bites at all or anything else. Just worms or whatever it was that we were using, empty lines and so on. So we decided, okay, we'll start up the motor again and try a different spot. This must be not a good spot to fish. And so we went to start the motor. The motor wouldn't start. Eventually we managed to get it started, but then went to drive off and the gear thing just came right out. And we're in the middle of Port Phillip Bay with no motor. Oh, and there were 2 oars in the boat, so I got the boys working on the oars and started to row back towards the shore, which seemed to be getting further and further away. And we were rowing for a little bit, but Peter was stronger than John, and so the boat tended to go around in circles a little bit. And then one of the boys lifted the oar up, and the oar lock that the oar goes through dropped off the oar and into the ocean. So we had one oar lock and going nowhere fast. And so we saw some boats in the distance, and we waved, and eventually someone saw us and came over, and they threw a line over to us and towed us back in. And we were just getting near the pier, and I think it was Peter said, "Oh, I'm going to jump in and swim ashore." And so he jumped in and started to swim, but the current sort of dragged him away, so someone had to go and rescue him. Anyone want to come fishing with me? Have you ever asked anyone to go fishing with you and had a similar experience? You know, Jesus, when he first met the disciples, he asked them to go fishing with him. He said, "I want you to follow me and to catch men." And so they left everything and followed him. The passage you heard today is almost a repeat performance, isn't it, of exactly that same miracle of the fish that were caught. Way back then they'd been fishing all night and hadn't caught anything, and Jesus said, "Just put out your net on one side of the boat and you'll catch fish." And they did, caught a huge number of fish way back then. And this is a repeat story at the end of the Gospels, after Jesus had died and when he had risen again, and he appeared to them on the beach. And again, Jesus challenges disciples to go fishing with him. Fishing not for fish, but fishing for men and women and children. At the beginning of 2023, in a little church which is struggling, all of us getting older, and most of us not up to probably doing much in the way of fishing, but this morning I'm going to ask you to come fishing with me during 2023. I'm asking you to come fishing for men and women and children. That's what Peter started off to the other disciples. Jesus was gone. What they'd seen him once or twice. They didn't know what to do. They were back at Galilee in their old haunts. And Peter just says to the others, "Let's go fishing." Nathaniel and 2 of the disciples. They said, "We'll come with you." They went back to what they had known before Jesus arrived on their scene. What else could they do? They went out in the boat but caught nothing that night. I remember as a boy at Yarra Junction, at the back of Ben Warren, at our place, we had a next door neighbour, Wayne Godfrey. I don't know whether anyone remembers Wayne Godfrey, the Godfreys, but they owned the property, and Wayne went to school, a little bit younger than me, but we went fishing down the back of Ben Warren, and Wayne was a bit of a character and in many ways, a bit of a wild boy. And we threw our rods in and so on, but then we mucked around. Didn't worry about the fish too much and so on. And Wayne would go back, pull in his rod, and there would be a fish on the end of the rod. And quite a successful night fishing. Next night, exactly the same circumstances, the same spot. I went back with my brother Max and we went fishing. Oh, one bite the whole night. Lost all the bait on the end of the line. Who would want to come fishing with me? And so the disciples had a similar experience. Out all night, trying to catch fish but not getting a bite. I wonder what they talked about. Possibly do you think they talked about that previous experience with Jesus? You remember that Jesus sent us out to fish, caught those fish. Told us to throw on the other side of the boat, on the right-hand side of the boat. Let's try that. Do you think they tried that? Didn't work. We'll try the other side. Maybe we'll try the back. Maybe we'll try a different spot. But no fish. What's it like to fish all night and catch no fish, Brian? Sorry? Disappointing. Yeah? Frustrating? Maybe stop wanting to go fishing. I decided after the Wayne Godfrey thing that I wasn't a fisherman. And so we didn't really go fishing too much after that. Going fishing can be difficult. Alex had a terrible day fishing on the lake, sitting in the blazing sun all day without catching a single one. On his way home, he stopped at the fishmonger and ordered 4 rainbow trout. He told the fishmonger, "Pick 4 large ones and throw them at me." "Why do you want me to throw them at you?" asked the salesman. "So I'm able to tell my wife that I caught the fish." "Okay, but I suggest that you take the salmon," said the fishmonger. And he said, "Why?" "Because your wife came in earlier today and said that she would like to have salmon for tea." Yeah, some of us are not very good fishermen. And then Jesus was on the shore. And he'd been watching them, obviously. He called out to them, "Have you caught any fish, friends?" That's in the International Version. The actual wording is paidion, which is the word for child. So it was like Jesus was saying, "Boys, have you caught any fish?" They said no. I wonder if Jesus asked us today, "Have you caught any fish?" What our response as a church, as individuals, might be to him. Thinking of fish in terms of men and women and children. As we as a church, we've been out fishing, endeavouring to catch people in order that they might discover Jesus and know him and follow him. We'd probably be saying something similar to what the disciples were saying, being out fishing all night and we haven't caught very much at all. You know, there are a whole lot of tips. If you look up on the internet, you can, no doubt you've done that, Brian, look at what are the tips for catching fish. I'm having trouble catching fish. What are the tips? They say all sorts of things like this. Pay attention to the tides. Okay, so you've got to work out when the tide's coming in or when it's coming out, and I'm not sure which way it is better to catch fish, but you're not fishing long enough. You're perhaps not fishing at the right time. It's better to fish at night time, is it, than during the day? Preparation, you haven't got your gear together. Perhaps you haven't got the right tackle for the right fish. Maybe you're fishing in the wrong areas. Maybe fishing at the wrong time of the day. Maybe you're too loud. I mean, we were out fishing with Wayne Cottrey. That didn't seem to make any difference. We were mucking around, shouting and so on, and the fish still ended up on the line. They had nothing to do with it. I don't think it's so much about techniques as timing. You see, fishing without Jesus is pretty frustrating. Usually unsuccessful, a lot of hard work, maybe a considerable waste of our time. Fishing for people is something that if we do it in our own strength, is not very often successful. So Jesus calls out to them, and they don't know it's Jesus, but he calls out to them, and they must have think, who's this guy? We've been out fishing all night, and we've been trying every possible thing. I'm sure they tried to fish on the right-hand side. Jesus calls out to them and says, fish on the right-hand side, on the starboard side of the boat. I guess we can give it a go. How many times during that night do you think they've done that without success? What's the key to success when it comes to fishing? Fishing for fish back then, as they were, or fishing for men and for women? The answer lies in obeying Jesus' instructions, listening for his voice and his direction. They could have quite easily said, take a running jump. We're trained fishermen. We know what fishing's all about. But they didn't. They tried it again. Why is it that we do the same things over and over again as fishermen? It doesn't work, and yet we try the same thing. We do the same thing over and over again as churches, trying to reach out to people, and perhaps don't get the response that we would like. They say insanity is doing the same thing the same way and expecting a different result. We need to listen to Jesus' instructions. And so they dropped the net, and there were so many fish that they could not haul them in. Later on it says there are 153 fish, and people who have interpreted this and tried to come to an understanding and said there were about 153 nations in the world at that time, and so each fish stood for a particular nation. That's a nice little theory. It may be accurate or may not be. But they had this huge net full of fish, 153. So many that they could hardly handle the net. Struggled to bring them in. They dropped the net, and there were so many fish. They listened to the instruction of Jesus. It had to do with not only being on the right-hand side of the boat, but it had to do with the timing, following Jesus' instruction, listening for him. What's he saying to us as a church in terms of fishing for men and for women and children? It's interesting. I think we get us a little bit scared. We were sitting here on Christmas Day, and two families came in with 6 kids between them. A few months or so ago, similar situation. Brigitte didn't think she'd have Sunday school that day. And then that ended up 6 kids turned up again, different families. I been dropping in food to a lady with a number of children, and I just felt that it was appropriate to say, would your children like to come to Sunday school? And she said yes. And so they were the 2 children who've been coming to Sunday school. I think Brigitte is really scared at this stage that she's not going to be able to cope with the number of kids in Sunday school. You see, they dropped a net and there were so many fish that they could not handle them. It's listening to God, listening to Jesus, and responding to that. You know, of the people that I know in my life, the person who was the greatest evangelist, the greatest fisherwoman that I know is my mum. And I've just got a picture in my mind now. She was, I don't know, going on in her 70s. She died when she was 73. She was in hospital, in bed in hospital. She's got a huge big black phone, you know, black phone. She's got this phone in hospital, and she's ringing people associated with bedwear, ladies who were struggling with their kids and their families and so on. And Mum was on the phone. You know, Mum, I think, did more fishing when she was in hospital than when she was out of hospital. She'd go around to the wards and talk to people, and they were having problems. She'd tell them Jesus loves them. It's being available and listening to the voice of Jesus. Peter, the disciples and Samuel, John. They suddenly woke up. This stranger on the beach, it's the Lord. And they got so excited. And Peter ripped, he was half naked because he was fishing and so on, puts his clothes on, hops in the water and races into the beach to say hello to Jesus and to catch up with him. And the other disciples row in as quickly as they can, dragging the 153 fish behind them. Have you ever had that sort of experience where you've said, it's the Lord, it's Jesus? I was got an invitation to preach at Millgrove Baptist Church in Melbourne, and I had to go to a conference beforehand, so I went to the conference, and the conference went longer than it was supposed to, and I suddenly realised, I've got to go to this service. And I went to grab my notes and realised I'd left my notes because I'd used the same message that morning in church, and I'd left my notes behind. And I only had enough time to get from where I was to the church in time to be able to preach, and so I did. And I did the best I could using my memory, which is, as you well know, not very good. And at the end of the service, I said, would anyone like to renew their commitment to Jesus? Most of them were Christians. And I just felt that that was something that I should do at the time. And there are 2 holy ladies who came down the front and knelt down the front. I thought, this is good. So I decided to to go down the front with them and be able to pray with them at the end of the service. And I just had this feeling that I was being crowded in. I looked up and around. The whole church had come down the front. The whole church had come down the front. That was one of those times in my life when I just said, it's the Lord. And I'll drive you home afterwards and think, Lord, I'm into this. If you're going to do this every time, I'm in. It's the Lord. Just this week, heard my usual walk, 6 o'clock in the morning, along the walkway down Yarra Junction, and walking along minding my own business, and I hear this noise behind me, and bike coming, so I pulled over one side, and the guy riding the bike went past me, and he must have looked back at me, and he suddenly stopped. He said, "Ray." I said, "Yeah." I didn't recognise who it was. He said, "Oh, I won't say his name. I've just been thinking of you and Brigitte." And we chatted his daughters. He's bought a house and he's got his daughter there and got a few problems and issues, and he asked if there's any way could be helped or whatever. And we said goodbye to each other. And he'd said to me, I just felt that I should stop. I went home and one of those, it's the Lord. It's the Lord. So I texted him and said, you know how you said you felt like it was meant to be that we were meant to talk. And I said, that's a God thing. I said, I'd maybe like to invite you to a men's breakfast or whatever like that. And he answered me back and he said, yeah, I'm sure there was something bigger than us that stopped me in that moment. You just know it when it's the Lord. What a morning, H.A. Ironside said, so the Lord cooked Peter's breakfast. Bring the fish that you've just caught. What a lovely sight. The fire of coals, the mist rising from the lake, and Jesus with them. And the disciples enjoyed the fish that he prepared for them. What a picture. They just knew it was the Lord. I was thinking, what was Jesus like as a fisherman? And going back to Luke, where the previous story was the first time that Jesus had sent them off in the boat to go fishing, and looked up the verses that followed, and these are the stories that come. The Pharisees and the doctors of the law, a paralysed man is brought to Jesus, and the doctors of the law and the Pharisees are standing around watching this happening, ready to pick holes in Jesus. And Jesus says to the paralysed man, my friend, your sins are forgiven. And the Pharisees, you can't say that. Who can forgive sins but God? Don't you think Jesus was doing some fishing? Some stirring? Fishermen washing their nets, and Jesus is preaching, and so many people, and he's crowded in, and so he says to the four disciples in the fishing boat, can I hop in your boat and can I use your boat? Jesus was fishing, using the situations. And then he challenges them afterwards and says, what about going out and trying, because they said they'd been fishing all night and they'd had no success. And he said, what about going out and trying again to see how you go? And they go out and try again, and they get this huge load of fish come that they couldn't handle. 2 boats between them, they couldn't handle all this fish. Don't you think Jesus was fishing? Fishing for men, not fishing for fish. Peter says, lead me, Lord, I'm a sinful man. And they were so overcome by the enormity of what had just happened. And Jesus cures a leper man. And he tells the leper man, don't tell anybody. But he says, go and show yourself to the priest and make an offering. And Jesus had healed a man, and the man with leprosy was going to tell the priest. Don't you think the whole world would know? Levi is sitting at his table collecting tax. And Jesus goes up to him and says, follow me. Then he went with Levi and sat in his home and ate food with him. And the Pharisees and the Sadducees said, you shouldn't be eating with those sorts of people. Jesus was an incredible fisherman for men. So many things. You could just go through those stories of how Jesus was just able to touch people's lives by saying a word of truth, speaking plainly, being prepared to tread on a few toes, stir a little bit. But in the midst of it all, he loved people. I just want to finish with a final experience of mine. I don't forget it. We went to Israel. We stood on the beach where this happened. We hopped in a fishing boat and went out to the Sea of Galilee. And I can't tell you what it was like. It was just certainly one of those occasions when Jesus was just so real, just spoke to you so much. Never had an experience like that. It was surreal, just incredible. I've actually got a tape of it, but we haven't got our tape. I can't show you, otherwise we would. Will you come fishing with me? In 2023. Will you ask Jesus to give you an opportunity to fish for men, for women, children? Will you ask him? Listen for his voice. Listen for that moment. You'll know when it's the Lord. And be prepared to speak up, to invite, to challenge, to maybe even rub them up the wrong way a little bit, to get them thinking, as Jesus so often did when you look at those passages. Will you come fishing with me? I'm making a suggestion, and that is that each Sunday for the rest of January, that we give opportunity for us to tell a fishing story. You can tell a fishing story about fishing if you like, but fishing for men, fishing for women, fishing for children. Will you pray today and ask Jesus to give you an opportunity and to show clearly that he wants you to speak for him into somebody's life? And over January, we're going to have opportunity in each of our services to share an opportunity that we've had to share about Jesus. And each month through the year, we'll give an opportunity. So it's not something we just do for the first month, but to remind us throughout the year that we'll share our stories of sharing Jesus. Let's pray. Lord Jesus, you've been with us this morning. You've touched my heart and you've touched the hearts of each person here. And we've given each other a challenge. Lord, I'm available. These people are available for you. We're old and crotchety at times, and our skills are not so great. But we're saying, as people, as a church, we're available, we're listening. Will you show yourself to us and direct us? Give us words to say. Give us hearts that are full of love. And we ask it in your name.